The other thing I'll say about this is that the price point often is an indicator of what people are willing to invest.
Yeah.
I sometimes use price as a qualifier. So if you're not willing to pay the price, it tells me a little bit about how much you're willing to invest. And I'm investing my time in the relationship. So I want to work with the people that are ready to make an investment with it and are going to do the work. And so price isn't just a value exchange. It also indicates I'm ready to invest in this. And I think that's especially with coaching, that's a really important signal.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Dorin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Welcome to the Product Tea. Today we have someone that is back for a second round of continuous tea discovery drinking habits with Leah and probably needs no introduction. But in case you want one anyway, she's my go-to author recommending about guiding teams through customer interviews, experiments, and data-driven decision-making. And I'm very glad she's here now again. Teresa Torres, welcome to the Product Tea for the second time. Teresa, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this.
All right. So, Teresa, one question that I ask everyone is, what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
I would say the big one is they think that I'm an extrovert. And it's because I'm pretty outgoing, but I'm not an extrovert. So I spend a lot of energy being social, and then I have to go home and be a hermit for a few days.
For a few days even.
Yeah. So it's actually kind of funny because it shows up in my work. I'll tell you a funny story about this. I get a lot of requests from people that you can imagine, you probably get this as well. Like, hey, can I pick your brain? Can we meet for coffee? Oh, I see you live in my city. Can we get together? For me, the answer has to be no, because it's so expensive. If I go and have coffee with 3 strangers in a week, I will not socialize with friends. I will not be able to interact with the people that are a big part of my life. And so I've learned I have to say no to those. Well, it's really hard because a lot of people in the tech industry say yes to all of that. And so people take it as like this big affront. Whereas really what I'm trying to do is I'm actually extremely introverted, and socializing takes a lot of energy, and I'm trying to just set a healthy boundary. And the funny story about this is I live in Bend, Oregon. And about a year or 2 after I moved here, Gib Biddle moved here. And Gib Biddle is, do you know Gib?
Yes, yeah, I do.
Okay. Yeah, so he's the former VP of product at Netflix and Chegg, and he does a lot of public speaking, and he's extremely extroverted. And so then I would start to get emails from people that were like, hey, I live in Bend. Can we have coffee? And I'd be like, hey, I'm really sorry. What I do is I say, I'm going to this meetup. We can meet at this meetup. Like, that's the way that I still connect with people locally, is I sort of constrain it to one event. And some people are now replying like, well, why won't you meet with me? Gib meets with me. Like, Gib met with me. So they're trying to use Gib as this, like, Gib was willing to do it. Why aren't you? I'm like, okay, well, Gib and I are not the same person. And, I don't have to justify myself to you. So that's one that, I'm pretty boisterous and outgoing, but that doesn't mean I'm extroverted.
Yeah, thank you, Gib, for this one. I hope you're not listening to this podcast. Just messed it up for Teresa. So I can actually relate to this. Like, if you have an extrovert in your kind of inner circle, they mess things up like this constantly for you. Because
what's hard too is these requests cause me a little bit of pain, right? Like, I get that this is an ethos in the tech industry that we should share our knowledge and we should meet with each other. And I spent 20 years in the Bay Area. I know this is a big part of the culture, but I also have to protect my personal boundaries. And the way that I'm going to share my knowledge is through my blog. It's through podcasts. It's ways that work for me. It's not going to be through one-on-one coffees.
Yeah. So I have 2 thoughts on this. So the first one is, I think this entire phrase of picking your brain, I find really awkward and weird, by the way, as a non-English native speaker, just saying at this point. And it's exactly also what you said. And I think this goes a little bit into the same direction as if you are a higher level executive in a company, or whether you are kind of like one of these tech celebrities like we are sometimes. A lot of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, so it is a lot, of course, right? We also have to kind of maintain your empire, of course. We would probably work more if we could. What happens is that a lot of the work that you do is kind of centered around other people in a lot of aspects. And what that means is either you meet people face to face or in video calls, or you write something for other people, but you have to sync quite a lot, right? You're constantly, you have 100 people every day that you are interacting with. And it's a very asymmetric kind of connection. And like you, I also have I'm empathetic towards this. I understand, you want to talk to someone, and some of them are more accessible and some of them are not. But I feel like I do remember that before this also was happening for me, it was quite hard for me to kind of understand why some people were reacting and some were not. And I thought it's more like, hey, maybe I'm approaching this the wrong way. Like, why do some people come easily to my podcast? Why do some people not come to my podcast? John Cutler, for instance, he was like, yeah, let's do it. And I did not know John at all. And he's become a really good friend. But that's just like John, how John is. If you ask John at the right minute, the right time of the day, something, he's going to jump off a rock with you. That's just what he does. But some people, like me, like you, it's not about the method. It really is the context correct in the sense of like, are we doing business with each other? Is this at the right level? Is it also at the right time? And does this make sense for me in the first place or not? And how does it compete with the rest of my kind of structured day? And do I want this? And usually the answer is no.
The other thing too is I think people miss some of the context. So the other one I get a lot is like when Marty Cagan is promoting a book, he does a ton of free speaking.
Yeah.
I don't do any free speaking anymore. And part of it is to protect my energy, right? So I charge a speaking fee. And if you pay my speaking fee, I still limit how many speaking engagements I do, right? So even if you're willing to pay my fee, it doesn't mean I'm going to come to your company and speak. And a lot of this is because, again, it costs a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So I try to reserve my speaking slots for the companies that are committed to a transformation and also engaging us for training. Because now it's like we're actually partnering to help your company transform. And that's great. And I'm more than willing to do anything and everything to help that. But what I don't want to do anymore are these flyby talks. I'm just going to come in and give a talk for an organization that has a speaker series. They're bringing in 20 people. Like, that's a lot of energy for me that doesn't get a ton of return. And I don't think it has a huge impact on the organization. Like, you're not going to transform from a 1-hour talk. Like, you have to put more behind it.
No.
Well, I get a lot of pushback from companies. I get emails that are like, Teresa, you don't want to take our money? And like, first of all, why are you even charging a fee? Marty Cagan speaks for free. Okay, well, let's talk about the difference between me and Marty Cagan. I don't know if Marty's extroverted or introverted. I know that like speaking is one of the most common ways he does lead gen for his business.
No.
That's not how I do lead gen for my business. I blog and do podcasts. That's how I do lead gen for my business. So it plays a really different role. And I think what's hard is that like, if you're working at a company and you just see the public face of all these people, it's not like I actually do have a handbook on my website about how to reach me and what I do and don't do, but like nobody reads it, right? So I get why people don't get it and don't see the differences, but it's kind of exhausting. It takes a lot of work. Like every time I get one of those emails that are like, you don't want to take our money, and they're kind of offended by it, I'm like, hey, business is mutual. We get to decide how we want to transact together. It's not just I'm here to fill your order, right? And I think that's a piece that's often missing.
So I find that very interesting because there's two factors to this. So the first one is, in some kind of way, isn't it sad that we're starting to charge money for the things that we don't like to do? Like, shouldn't it be the other way around?
I actually really like to speak at companies, and I really like speaking at events. I really enjoy it. The challenge for me is it's expensive for me from an energy standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't do it every day, right? And I've learned over time, I can do it a certain number of times. Like maybe I can do 1 a week, or at my absolute limit, I can do 2 a week. Okay, well, I'm very fortunate in that I have more demand than I have capacity. So now, if I have more demand than I have capacity, I have a choice. I can break my rules and do things that are bad for me personally, which I'm just at this stage of my life not going to do. Or I can say, okay, if I have more demand and limit and capacity, I want to spend that capacity on the companies where I can have the biggest impact.
No.
And I think I want to do the inspiring keynote at the company that has a head of product that's committed to transforming, that's investing in training. I don't want to do it at the company where I'm being brought in to be of one of 20 speakers in a speaker series where they're just trying to inspire their team, but they're not putting anything behind it, right? So it's just a filter. It's a way of matching demand to limited capacity.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to be told you're not qualified.
What do you mean, not qualified?
Like, you're not where I can have the biggest impact, right? Like, I'm not going to do this event Like I have a template when people reach out to speak, to ask me if I speak at their company. First, we get over the pricing hurdle. So I reply with, here's the talks I give. Here's my speaker fee.
Oh yeah, that one page. Yeah, you sent me that one too, like 4 years ago. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And then if they still come back, that tells me, okay, you're willing to pay a speaker fee. We've qualified you a little bit. If they still come back, I then say, and by the way, I have very limited speaking spots and I reserve them for companies that meet this criteria.
Yeah.
There's a head of product involved that's driving a transformation and you're interested in exploring our other training options. And that's usually where, like, if the person that reached out to me is like an HR person or a product center of excellence person or a product ops person, and again, there's nothing wrong with any of these rules, but if they're reaching out to me because they're running like a speaker series, that's almost never going to be part of a transformation or part of a like bigger engagement. No. It's just, they want a 1 hour talk. And I'm sure you get this too. Like I get like, hey, my team needs to learn how to do customer interviews. Can you come do a 1 hour talk for us? Okay, well, I know that I teach well. I don't teach well enough to teach your team how to conduct interviews in 1 hour. Like that's not the right format. Like the way to learn interviews is to practice over and over and over again. And that's why we have a 5-week course on that. So that's the other thing. There's like, is the medium matching the outcome, the goal that you're looking for?
So I think my weapon of choice to kind of shut this down is I call those media kits. I have one for workshops and I have one for others. Like I do exactly this, right? Like I don't discuss, I just like send the media kits. And then I have tracking. I see how far people get. Usually it's until the pricing page and then they kind of leave anyway. But that's fine, right? Like it's kind of fine. And I think it hints a little bit at what the actual problem is that we tend to have because we are in a different situation than the majority of the market, right? Like everybody else in some kind of way. And that is, it's very hard for people to imagine how something is if you're not in it yourself. So I'll give you a very specific example. I asked you once for some advice on a very specific problem that I had, but I did not ask like, hey, Teresa, do you have 30 minutes? I would like to pick your brain on something.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. It's just like, no. I gave you the very specific question. You were like, yeah, here's a book.
Yeah. It was also relevant to me, right? So first of all, I'm sure some people are going to listen to this and think, wow, Teresa thinks she's too good for us. She's very like particular. Again, I want to highlight, like, I am at a point where I could spend all day, every day responding to these requests. And that's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my business. It's really about matching demand to capacity. And at some point, you get to a point where you have to have filters and you have to have rules. So Leah, you've reached out to me a couple times. I think recently you reached out to me about an experience you were having with a conference organizer. And I want to highlight, I won't get into the specifics of that request, but I want to highlight a good request versus a bad request. I get a lot of requests from complete strangers that are like, Teresa, will you be my product mentor? Okay, no, I won't be your product mentor. I don't know you. I have no relationship with you. That's very broad. It has nothing. Yeah, sure, I'm an educator in the product space, but that's not a match, right? What Leah did was, Leah, you reached out about a very specific thing that you were having a hard time with that was related to being a speaker at a conference. That I have been in that situation before. You asked a very specific question. You reached out over Slack, which did not even fill my inbox, which is great. And it was a really easy way for me to just respond in 2 minutes and then move on. And it helped you. It was easy for me.
I don't remember now what I bitched about, but I'm pretty sure I bet.
So I think I have a feeling like I get a lot from students. Like I think in college, maybe professors are saying like one of the great things about LinkedIn is you can reach out to anybody. And that is true. But I think if you want it to be effective, you have to be more specific in your ask and more targeted in your ask. And I think one of the mistakes people make is they reach out to the person that's getting hundreds of requests. Whereas I think if they reach out to a person that's just a little bit ahead of them, right? Like if you're a college student and you want to learn what it's like to be a product manager, don't reach out to me or Leah, reach out to somebody in their first product management job. And I think that's a way to sort of match these requests, like to get a higher success. And now that doesn't mean I'm not ever going to help a student who's looking for their first product management job, but I'm probably going to help the student that's the son or daughter of a friend of mine. It's not going to be a complete stranger. And that's because I have limited hours in my week, and where I can have more impact is writing and teaching about product discovery. And that's the trade-off. Like every time I decide to do a 30-minute coffee with somebody about getting into product management, it's coming at the cost of writing or teaching about product discovery. And I have to ask the question, where can I have more impact? I can have more impact by writing and teaching about product discovery. So that's how I choose to spend my time.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think if we're looking at this from the perspective of like, hey, so what increases or decreases your chance of a reply? Because you can also look at it in this way. So I think the more kind of like, let's call ourselves up market. And up market, I don't mean like more important. It's just that, like we have a lot of attention that's coming, right? Like we're more like higher value in the sense of having more exposure in the market. I don't mean like necessarily more valuable. It's just like we have more exposure in the market. Yeah, like you're an accomplished author, you're much more known than me. But I think specifically if you try to reach out to people in general, and whether this is prospects or companies or whatever you do, please do not write, hey, can I ask you a question? For instance, right? Do not expect me, please, to do product discovery on you to kind of figure out what you want from me. So you have a chance of getting an answer from me if the question is very much on point, easy to answer in itself, and not overly complicated. Like if you apologize 5 sentences before and afterwards that you even ask the question and you're not sure, like asking for permission and so forth, the moment I have to go back and forth with you to kind of figure out what you actually want, your chances are decreasing dramatically because we're used to this, right? Like we're very, very used to this. So like if you cannot make a snappy request, then it's not going to get answered. And it's like you said, right? Like you always try to go to someone that is a little bit ahead. I do check also on LinkedIn, like people that ask me, it's not about what they ask. It's also like who asks. And it's not just about friends. The same is also like, is it a relevant company? Like, I'm sorry to say, but if the CEO from Netflix is asking me something, he can probably write, hey, Leah, how's it going? Can I ask you a question? So it's always about like who is asking exactly in the way that you said. And you have to kind of work yourself up also a little bit. And that's not because you're not valuable. It's just that a lot of people have the same idea.
One thing I see too is everybody believes their organizational context is completely unique. There is truth to that. Every organizational context is unique, but there's also a lot of similarities. So people email me for help and they write like a 3-page email. And this is the first contact we've ever had. I don't know them. They're writing a 3-page email. They're writing about every little detail about their organization. And then they end with like, what do you think? I can't respond to those emails. Like first of all, first contact, why are you emailing me 3 pages?
No.
Right? So here's what I'll say. I will share the emails that I do respond to, right? If you email me and say something like, I work at a startup, I read your book. Okay, great. You just told me that you're investing and learning about what I teach and you're familiar with me, or I've read your blogs. And here's what I'm struggling with this one specific piece. I don't have customers yet. How do I find customers? Awesome. Turns out I've written a blog post about that, and I'm more than happy to reply and link to that blog post. Even better would be if you actually searched my blog for something about that and didn't email me. But I get it. Sometimes things are hard to find.
Yeah.
So again, like if it's a specific brief request that is relevant to what I teach and write and share, I am more than happy to help. But I think what's hard is people don't think about it from their point of view. If you're an individual contributor, maybe you get a lot of email, but it's a lot of email that you don't really have to respond to. Maybe you get a handful a day from coworkers that actually require a response. I get hundreds of emails, hundreds of Twitter DMs, hundreds of LinkedIn requests. I'm now getting Substack emails. Like I cannot literally keep up. And I get that this is like a nice privileged place to be. And it's because my book is popular and I have a popular blog. And like, I'm not complaining about this. It's just the reality of like, if I have 100 unread messages to get through this morning, I'm probably not going to read the poorly written 3-page context before you even get to your question when I don't even know you.
No, I think there's one exception to this. And I think I had a really good outreach last week, actually, from someone asking me about coaching. So they said like, like the first paragraph, like, hey, are you available for coaching? And here's some context afterwards. And I'm like, hey, this is really useful because I cannot coach this guy. So I asked like, hey, can I forward this to a friend of mine? Because he might be actually interested in this. Because what people also need to kind of realize is that, like, even though, I mean, I'm very expensive for this, it also helps me if I can actually connect someone good that is willing. And it was very clear that they put a lot of thought into this message as well. I was just forwarding this to a friend, and now I think they're getting together and everything kind of seems to work out. That's kind of okay too, right? But like, it needs to be structured well. And I think then you can get somewhere. And I think this is so much the same as if you are reaching out to a company. I do not believe this fairy tale of the SDR constantly calling the CEO of big companies and they're just like constantly closing things directly. It's the same dynamic. It really is the same dynamic. You have to go in from the bottom, work yourself slowly up, or you are showing that you're interested in the company over a longer time, right? Like you're also engaging with the content. So specifically for you and me, it's very, very helpful if we recognize the same kind of faces that are always with us, like always the same faces to come to the talks, the same people who are really genuinely interested when we're doing things. We do remember the faces, for better or worse. But
what's funny about this is I think like good communication, whether it's emailing somebody, whether it's replying on social media, like it's product people should be good at this, right? Because like we know to be a good product person, we should have empathy for our customer. But when you message somebody, you should have empathy for that person. So like if you just take 1 minute to try to situate yourself in that person's situation and be like, okay, well, Teresa wrote a really popular book. She probably, if I'm thinking about emailing her, I'm probably not the only one. So it doesn't mean don't email me. It means think about how to write your email in a way that's easy for me to respond to, right? Like that's the key. Like how do you make it really easy for me to respond? And if you do that, like the thing to know about me, I genuinely want to help people adopt the discovery habits. So if that's what you're emailing me about, odds are you're going to get a reply. But if what you're emailing me about has nothing to do with discovery habits, I'm probably not going to reply to that.
No. And I think it's just, in the end, no matter what you do, no matter how perfect that you formulate your approach and so forth, I think you just have to accept that with some people, you will never get an answer. And it's just because for some reasons that you just do not know. So do not focus yourself also too much on like individuals. I feel like that's also not healthy because I also have my stalkers. I'm feeling like they never get the message. You're laughing.
Yeah.
I know you do too. But like I have my stalkers and they're not letting go. And it's that is a scary feeling for me as well. And I'm just like, hey, look, dude, you've sent now 30 messages.
This is another thing that I wish people appreciated. You can email me and I will probably help. But if it starts to go back and forth and we're getting into all the nitty gritty of your specific situation, at some point we're crossing the line into I'm now coaching you. That's a service you should be paying for, right? And this is, again, like what's hard about this is one of the things I love about the tech industry is there's this very strong ethos of helping each other. But for those of us that make our living educating, teaching, there's a limit to how much you can ask for free. Nobody is asking you to do your job for free, right? Like if you work as an IC at a company, nobody's asking you to do your job for free. At some point, when you go back and forth, you're going to cross this line and you need to be talking about a formalized relationship. And I actually several years ago launched a low-cost community for this purpose, right? Because I want to help people and I want to help people that can't afford coaching. So I created a community specifically where you can come and ask a question and I will answer it. I hang out in the community all day, every day, and I still get pushback from people. They don't want to do that. And the community is like $350 for 12 months of support. 12 months of support. It includes office hours every single month. It includes opportunities to connect with peers every single month. I'm in the community every single day.
That is a cool idea, though.
It's a low-cost option. If you're not willing to invest a little bit to get help once you cross that certain point, it's no longer reasonable to expect someone to keep helping you for free. People have to recognize, like, this is how we make our living.
That's a cool idea. But I think, there's this, so I have a friend who's a doctor. And, once people know that you are a doctor, they're going to ask you about doctor things constantly. And I always feel super, super, super bad when I ask him about something because I know exactly how that feels. And I don't want to be too gatekeepy as well, right? Like I have a very, very specific kind of where I also like I give advice or I don't and so forth. I also try to kind of keep it now from my private life. Unfortunately, I don't have that many scale ups as personal friends. So this is easy kind of like, because everybody asks me for startup advice and I'm just sometimes like, hey, I really should not look at your pitch deck. I'm not that good in biotech or like whatever it is. But it is interesting because people just assume that, or like they want help. I mean, it's understandable, right? Like, yeah, you work in tech, so therefore you know how to repair an iPhone.
You know what? Here's what I'm going to say. I don't want people to listen to this and be discouraged from asking for help. What I want people to take away from it is when you ask somebody for help, whether it's me or Leah or anybody else, and that person sets a boundary, respect it. There's no way for you to know what other people's boundaries are. Lots of people are willing to help. So feel free to send that initial email. That initial email never bothers me, ever. I think it's perfectly fine to ask. I think the challenge is, and the places where I get frustrated, is where somebody asks, I help a little bit, and I set a boundary, and they completely ignore the boundary. That's where I feel like we cross a line into like, let's be human. Let's remember you're engaging with a human, and a human that's probably got a lot of other requests just like yours.
I think, this can happen quite a lot. And I think because you made this addition of like when we help a little bit and then it's not appreciated, that kind of unfortunately happens a lot. Like I think I had my most negative experiences when I actually did not charge for money. This is the interesting thing. This has also been my experience in my retail business. It was usually the customers that got a lot of stuff for free. And this is not to knock people now. There's a lot of also people that are very, very grateful for the free advice that you give. Of course, like you're also doing PLG in some kind of way. You're also giving a lot of free advice on your blog, on LinkedIn. All of this is non-gated. You put a lot of stuff out from your book without having to buy the book and so forth. But usually the problems are coming from those that absolutely never paid anything. And then they start to feel like, yeah, but this is common now. Or they just like, they think that some kind of precedence has now been established. But I also do say, I started like at the beginning, I had problems also setting these boundaries for myself. I started to feel bad. Like, why am I not available anymore for people, right? Like I started to kind of blame myself again in this regard, So like I have empathy for both sides.
I agree. And I think every creator goes through this, right? You have to figure out what your boundaries are, and they're going to be different for every person, right? So like we talked about Marty. Marty does a ton of free speaking, and he runs every book he writes. He runs this like promotion where if a company buys 100 books, he'll go speak at that company for free. That's a great way to sell books.
That is a cool way.
It's not a great way for me to sell books.
That is true.
Because that hour of speaking is very expensive for me, right? It's a great way for Marty to sell books. So this is the thing. There's not one answer that works for everybody. It's just not true, right? And there's no way on the outside for you to know what's the right answer for that person. So I will reiterate, feel free to ask. But when there's a boundary set, you have to respect the boundary. And I think most creators struggle with this. I will tell you, I am 13 years in, and I still have a hard time with in fact, I have an admin who helps me with this so that I am like sheltering myself from it a little bit. Like when it sort of crosses the line, we kind of respond with like, hey, Teresa runs a community for this. You can get help there, because we've now crossed over into like, should no longer be a free service. It's still hard for me. Like I genuinely want to help everybody. But that also gets me into trouble because again, every minute I spend helping someone for free over email is a minute that takes away from writing and teaching about product discovery.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to say that most people also do understand this. It's just that the few that do not, because they cannot emphasize with it, or they're just like a little bit differently wired and so forth, they drain a lot of energy. And I just want to say this, and in that regard, that this is really not the majority, but they are very, very loud then, and the amount of energy that they kind of pull from this and so forth. So like, if we take this as a creator, right? So like we're doing something, we're starting to have less hours in the day than we wish. Things are starting to get a little bit hectic, and we have to kind of figure out how we protect our time and our boundaries. As you said, monetization is a very good way on this. I have a very specific way on how I approach this, but do you remember the first time when you started to kind of have to think about monetization? Like, how much do I charge for a specific event of my time, right? So like, hey, like a speaking engagement, or what is my hourly price for coaching and so forth. Do you remember how you priced this? Like, what was a specific trigger and how would you do it different? Because I have a specific story for this one after.
I don't remember how, like, so the first the first service I offered pretty consistently was coaching. And to be honest, I don't remember how I set my initial price, but I can tell you one of my very first clients, I was hired by their head of HR, and I ended up coaching all of their product managers. And about 3 months into the engagement, the head of HR pulled me aside and said, Teresa, you need to raise your rates. You should at least double or triple them. I was really lucky. Very few customers are going to tell you that. Basically, what he was saying was the value I was delivering was far higher than the price that I was charging. He and I are still friends to this day. I really appreciate that he did that for me. I started to dig into pricing and to learn about how do you set the right price. And I read a tip that was really helpful for me, which was when you're selling a service, after 3 yeses in a row, raise your price. It means price is not a barrier. You probably have room to increase the price. So in my earliest days, I followed that for a very long time, and it worked really well. The challenge I have with that advice as an absolute is I'm at the point now where I'm trying to offer products and services that span the whole market. So coaching was a very big ticket, big investment, high value, high touch option. And the challenge I had with that is I don't want to just serve the companies that can afford to pay for coaching. And so that's what motivated me to get into online courses, because it's something I can offer at a lower price point. It's something that motivated me to offer a community, because I can offer that at an even lower price point. And so like, it's not just about like, can you maximum? It's why I wrote a book, because I offer my Kindle version of my book for $10. So it's not just about like, I'm going to charge the most I can for every single product or service. It's really about thinking about how am I going to cover the market? Because I really genuinely want to have an impact on as many teams as possible. And a team in Brazil is not going to pay that super high coaching fee that I was charging the large enterprise in the US, but they certainly can buy the book. They certainly can join the community. Some of them can certainly join the courses. So pricing, there's a lot of things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think this is my PLG wheelhouse, right? So like we have the propensity to pay, like what can someone afford to pay? Like just exactly what you said is also a very important thing there. But I think I started to approach this a little bit different. And I don't know from whom I have it, or like whether I thought this up in a fever dream myself, but the way that I think about compensation for anything, like how much is an hour of my time worth, has dramatically shifted when I was thinking about like, how do you set the right price point? Like, why is it that, and I always use the example of my cleaning lady, who is absolutely fantastic. She's really, really, really good. And I love her. I really, really do. But one of the reasons why I do not pay her more money than what I pay, and I pay a good salary compared to other kind of cleaning ladies, she's giving me back time. And that is invaluable. That is worth a lot more money than what I pay her. So why is it that I do not pay her more money? Is it because she doesn't ask for it? No, not really. That has nothing to do with it. Is it that it's not valuable what she does? No, that's not what it is either. It's definitely more valuable than what she does, right? Like my free time is worth that much. The problem is there is a specific limit that where you can interchange someone for something else, right? So like this is a competition problem. It's like there are other good cleaning ladies out there that are doing it for a much cheaper price at the same level of quality or whatever you want to do it, right? So like it is about who else can do the same job as this particular person. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I started to pay my cleaning lady, I don't know, like a specific rate at the very beginning per hour. I have since then almost doubled this rate. And the reason why I doubled it is because she's consistently good. And she's not anymore a faceless cleaning lady, but this is her. Right? Like this is her and there is not a second her. And I know because I've been working with her for quite some time. And this matters for you as a creator because I'm not like some random product coach. You're not going to pay a random product coach $1,000 an hour. You're not going to do that. And why you don't do this is because there's a lot of product coaches out there that are charging $100, $200, but there's just one Leah. And if you kind of understand me from the market in this way, like through my content and the way that I also produce myself, then I'm starting to identify myself. It's not that I'm more competent than others. It's just that the people who are sticking with me, that also are reading my stuff and so forth, they want to get coaching from me. They do not want to get coaching from some kind of product coach or mentor. Maybe they do. And those can also go to someone cheaper. But if you want the exclusive thing, then you're going to pay exclusive prices. And that is okay. And I think this is what people really have to understand. So it's not just about what you do, but also how do people that approach you, how do they recognize you? Because if I go with my skills to a convention for product coaches, then I cannot charge more than $300 an hour. I can't, because nobody there knows me.
Yeah. This is the value of a brand, right? And I think this is the value of creating content. So when I first started, I didn't know of any other product discovery coaches, right? I knew people that worked in similar spaces, but not in the same way. And I didn't have a lot of competition. People read my stuff and they chose to work with me. It wasn't, they were shopping. That's obviously changed. Product discovery is super trendy. There are dozens of product discovery coaches. I know because they're taking my classes, by the way. And they probably charge lower fees than me. And I hear from a lot of companies that are like, I can't afford your price. And I go, great. There's a huge market out there now for product discovery coaches. That doesn't bother me. I don't feel like they're competing with me. And I don't mean this to sound like an arrogant jerk, but I've been doing this for 13 years. I have literally worked with hundreds of teams. So I also wrote a book about it. And it's the book that a lot of those product discovery coaches are using, right? And if your budget, you can't afford me, you should work with one of those other product discovery coaches, but you shouldn't expect to get the same value from it. And for a lot of companies, maybe they don't need to get the same value from it. That's fine. But I think the key in a transaction is you're matching, or in a coaching relationship, you want to match. Here's where I am. Here's where I want to get. Who's the right coach for that? It doesn't always have to be the big name person, but sometimes it does. And I think what's important is you have to learn how to evaluate what your situation is and what you're trying to accomplish.
I like the tactical tip, though, of the 3 yeses, and then you just raise the prices. I'm just going to say one thing on this before we already get to the end. I really like this tactical kind of tip. But I think if you have $500 clients, $500 clients are bringing you $500 clients. And that's another thing that is quite important, because they will not recommend you with a higher rate than you actually have to others.
You know, the other thing I'll say about this is that the price point often is an indicator of what people are willing to invest.
Yeah.
I sometimes use price as a qualifier. So if you're not willing to pay the price, it tells me a little bit about how much you're willing to invest. And I'm investing my time in the relationship. So I want to work with the people that are ready to make an investment with it and are going to do the work. And so price isn't just a value exchange. It also indicates I'm ready to invest in this. And I think that's especially with coaching, that's a really important signal.
Yeah, it is 100%. Teresa, thank you very much for this short and snappy episode about exactly what we planned to talk about. And I hope you're coming back for a third serving at some point, not before you are 26 years into this. And yeah, how should people reach out to you? Should they do it on LinkedIn? Do you want to have long emails or short ones? How should they reach you?
You can find me at producttalk.org. You can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out in either place. I'm also still on Twitter at Torres. I know it's called X now. It's just habit. And be brief. I'm happy to help, but be brief.
All right. Be brief and talk to Teresa. Thank you very much. And that's it.
Thanks, Leah.
Boom. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.